So let's once again go to Lincoln Mitchell. He is the national political correspondent for the New York Observer, and Tara Dowdell. She is a political and business marketing consultant on the issue of immigration. This is the question: what happens in the general election? We're in the primaries right now, but all of the talk so far among all of the candidates on the Republican side, Tara, has been talking about closing borders, deporting immigrant families, no pathway to citizenship. How do you pivot back to the center, or do you pivot to the center when that has been such a contentious issue among Republican primary voters?
Well, it is going to be a difficult needle for the Republican Party to thread, because they will need to moderate the way they have been talking about immigration. It has been very vitriolic. It has turned off a lot of voters. But let's be clear, there is in this country, I think, a bigger sentiment than we would care to admit, an anti-immigrant sentiment that is more pervasive in this country, again, than we would care to admit. And so I think the Republican Party, you're seeing them tap into that with their base voters. But there's something that Donald Trump says that doesn't get a lot of attention that I think has resonance beyond just the angry sort of base voters that people constantly talk about. And that's, we're going to take care of our own people.
So, Lincoln, is it anti-immigrant or is it pro-American jobs? Because it goes back to what Bill Clinton used to always say: it's the economy, stupid. Is Donald Trump and all the others who are taking this anti-immigration stance, are they tapping into, I guess, a sense among the voters that we've seen all of our jobs go overseas, we've seen them go to Asians, we've seen them go to Mexico, to Mexicans, therefore we want those jobs back? Is that a different take on what we're seeing, this anger?
Well, if you look at things like unemployment, underemployment, frozen wages, and think that the problem is problem is Mexicans, you're really not analyzing the economy correctly. But this is an appeal. If we look at Donald Trump, Make America Great Again, this anti-immigrant appeal is appeal not, we can use the angry word, but also older white voters. This is appeal to people who see their country changing economically, culturally, socially, and aren't comfortable with that. And that lies at the very, very heart of Donald Trump's appeal, but also of the Republican Party more generally.
So
right?
let me ask the question to you, the same question I asked Tara just a second ago. How do you pivot back to the center when you've taken such a hardline approach on the issue of immigration?
Well, it depends who the nominee is. You could, if you're Marco Rubio, it's easy. You talk about your personal story. And he's the only one of these guys with an interesting personal story.
But right now, let's be realistic. Marco Rubio has not won a state.
Right, he's not going to be the nominee, very unlikely. If it's Donald Trump, I don't think Donald Trump pivots back to the center on this. I don't think he can. The main appeal of Donald Trump that he's tried to sell to the voters is, I'm the guy who stands up to political correctness. I tell it like it is, even if it's a particular brand of telling it like it is that is often, unburdened by any factual support. For him to pivot back undermines the whole kind of gestalt of his appeal, and I don't see how he is able to do that, or even how he thinks it might be in his interest to do that.
Well, Donald Trump has been flip-flopping all over the place, so it wouldn't surprise me if he does a few more flops and flips. But I will say this, though. I want to get back to this point about we're going to take care of our own people. What we've seen Donald Trump do with that is he targets that at black voters. He targets that at Hispanic voters who are citizens. And so I think you're going to see him do more of that if he is the nominee in the general election. And I'm telling people that message, whether it's a right message or not, whether it's divisive or not, and I do believe it's divisive in the way that he says it, we're going to take care of our own people. That message has more resonance than people care to admit in this country.
So let's move from anger to reality. Donald Trump says, in that soundbite we just played, I'm going to make sure that Apple makes its phones in America again as opposed to China. One of the things that I've been hearing throughout this campaign cycle is that our allies are concerned about trade agreements that we have, about international business, about a global economy that could collapse depending on who wins this next election. Are they legitimate in their fears of isolationist America?
Well, we certainly have two candidates, and I don't want to link these two because they're very different, but Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, who have, in terms of general foreign policy, have a very different conception of America's role in the world than the kind of mainstream foreign policy establishment of which both Rubio, Cruz, and Hillary Clinton are part. So if either of those two end up in the White House, we could see the United States charting a different foreign policy course. However, even with a president like Trump, things move much more slowly. There's much more entropy there than people realize. Our allies should be worried, but if we've been having this discussion in early 2000, many people were saying the same thing about George W. Bush. Now, in retrospect, they were right to be worried in many respects.
I'll say.
So, Tara, how concerned should we be?
I think we should be very concerned about, in particular, a Trump presidency, because he has proven himself to be unpredictable, nasty, and thin-skinned. And when you're dealing with world leaders, thin-skinned and unpredictable is the last thing we need in a commander-in-chief in this tenuous environment, because we are in a global slowdown. The United States is doing well, but many countries, with the exception of Germany and other countries, aren't doing so well.
The other thing that we focus on so much is the presidential race. There are down-ballot contests that are going to be taking place, House and Senate. The Republicans are very concerned that a Trump presidency, a Trump nomination could hurt the down-ballot issues as well. The lobbyists aren't going to stand still and listen to this rhetoric coming out saying, let's move all the jobs back to America, let's end this trade, let's do that. Is it possible once either, and you compared the two, a Sanders and a Trump, because they have such isolationist policies, is it possible for them to get done what they want to get done, Lincoln?
I think it's very difficult for any president to get done what they want to get done. The difference is, if Bernie Sanders were to be elected president, he would have, at very best, narrow Republican margins in the Senate and the House. And that is not the making of a political revolution. If Donald Trump were to get elected president, he would probably have Republican majorities, but establishment Republican majorities. And we have seen in American history, I mean, Jimmy Carter is a great example of this, came in with big Democratic majorities and accomplished very little. Working with Congress is extremely difficult, and there's nothing in Donald Trump's resume to suggest he can do that.
Ted Kennedy worked on health care for 40 years. Hillary Clinton tried to get health care through Congress, could not, even though they had a majority in both houses. What are the chances that Bernie Sanders, who wants universal health care, when we're on the subject of what can be done and what can't be done, what are the chances that a Bernie Sanders, for instance, can get universal health care if he gets elected?
Slim to none, because the reality is the Republican Party is still suing the president over Obamacare. There are people in the Republican Party that want to get rid of Medicare for some, let alone having Medicare for all. So the notion that the people who have spent so much time, so much resources trying to take apart something that's much less than universal health care are going to all of a sudden say, you know what, we're just going to stop. I just think that's not a really good way to look at it if I'm Bernie Sanders and thinking that's going to happen.
I agree with that, but also this raises the issue of Bernie Sanders' notion of political revolution, which is a shortcut for saying magic will happen. But when Bernie Sanders says political revolution, the question that any thinking person should ask is, who are the progressive Senate candidates, the progressive House candidates that you're supporting, that you're actively, that are part of your revolution, that will move the Congress leftward? Because without that, even if Bernie Sanders does ride in his, I guess, VW microbus, he can't do this alone. And the revolution is not a one-person show. That's not what a revolution is. So there's an illogic to the Sanders appeal. As much as many of his proposals and many of his critiques resonate with the people, he's given no reasonable argument how he gets from here to there.
We have had our first mention this morning of a VW microbus. Lincoln and Tara, stay with us. We're going to be checking back with both of you throughout our coverage this morning. Also,